So earlier this week, we looked at the Big Ten over under win totals, and I told you what I thought was right, what I thought was wrong, what was too high, too low, and what was dead on. And there were some ones that I thought, yeah, that's probably the right number. And I think when you look at the SEC's totals, there are a lot of that's the right number. And I don't think there are too many that are outrageous to me or crazy to me, whether they're too high, too low. I think, and by the way, I should mention these are the FanDuel projections for over under win totals in 2024 that we're looking at. I don't think there's too many that's that crazy in the SEC. Now, I think if you were to start asking, like, is this coach going to be the head coach of that program at the end of 2024 or something like that, then yeah, I think I would maybe have different opinions on those answers. But for the most part, the win totals, the over under win totals, I should say, are kind of interesting when you take a look at them here. Georgia and Texas are 10.5. Alabama, LSU, Missouri, Ole Miss 9.5. Tennessee and Texas A&M 8.5. Auburn, Oklahoma 7.5. Kentucky 6.5. Arkansas, Florida, South Carolina are 5.5. Mississippi State 4.5, and Vanderbilt 2.5. That is the over under win totals. And I think for the most part, there are a lot that are right, maybe more than not that are right. And I, for the most part in the Big Ten, I thought like, okay, Rutgers deserves a little bit more credit than that. Like, there are a couple of like, hey, and in the big or in the SEC, I beg your pardon, there were some that okay. And then you get to like, okay, does Vanderbilt deserve a little more credit than 2.5 wins? Yes. No, not a lot. Their non-conference schedule is not great. Their 4 non-conference games are Virginia Tech, Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State. Can they go 3-1 in the non-conference? Yes, I think so. I think they can beat Alcorn State, Georgia State, and Ball State. They might even beat Virginia Tech. Can Vanderbilt win 4 games? Yes, I think so. If this was at 3.5 and not 2.5, I don't know that I would sit here and tell you, like, I think you should bet that. 2.5, I think they can get to 3 wins. But 4, I don't know, because their SEC schedule is pretty brutal. At Missouri, Alabama, at Kentucky, Texas, at Auburn, South Carolina, at LSU, Tennessee. That's a rough one for the Commodores. So do they go 0-8 in SEC play? Probably. But can they go 3-1 in the non-conference that features a Sunbelt school, a MAC school, FCS, and an ACC, a bottom-tier ACC school? Yes, I think so. So give me Vanderbilt to hit the over on 2.5 wins. And I don't know that I feel great about it, but damn it, give the Commodores some respect. And also, if you were watching on YouTube, my color coding here is like the greens feel like they're a little low, yellow feels like that's the right number, and red feels like that number is too high. So there are a couple of other ones that I thought were low. Kentucky at 6.5 feels low because similarly to Vanderbilt, their non-conference is not super difficult. They are taking on Southern Miss, Ohio, Murray State, and Louisville. Now, Louisville is maybe the most assuredly the one that's a loss. But are they 3-1 there? Yes, I think so. Unless you're counting a loss to Southern Miss or Ohio. I don't think you can count a loss to Murray State as likely. So they're 3-1 in the non-conference. Their conference slate is both somewhat difficult and also somewhat easy. They play Georgia at home. They're at Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Texas. That sucks. But then on the flip side, they're home for Vanderbilt, at Florida, home for Auburn. So Kentucky at 6.5 when they go 3-1 in non-conference, in my opinion, and potentially even 4-0, depending on what Louisville is. I'm not a huge Louisville believer, but at worst, probably 3-1 in the non-conference. So that's 3-1. A win over Vanderbilt is 4. A win over Florida is 5. A win over Auburn is 6. South Carolina, probably not going to be that great. A win over South Carolina is 7. And that's without, a super upset win over Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas. I don't know that I would project them to win any of those 4 games, but 6.5 feels borderline right number, but I think it's just slightly. I think you could argue Kentucky is just above that, unless they are not as good as South Carolina, which we'll talk about here in a second. Alternatively, Oklahoma is also right there on the cusp of 7.5 wins. And I don't know what that says about Oklahoma. I wonder what the thought process is there. Is it that, hey, the non-conference is a little more difficult than you think it is? Because the non-conference is Temple, Houston, Tulane, and Maine. To me, that's 4-0. Let's say worst case scenario, it's 3-1. The schedule is somewhat difficult. Home for Tennessee, at Auburn, Texas, South Carolina, at Ole Miss, at Missouri, Alabama, at LSU. On paper, that does not shout, oh, this is a 10-win team. And they might have the talent to be a 10-win team, but when the start of the season, you have 6 games on your schedule against ranked opponents, like, oh, wow, hell, that might be pretty difficult. But they get Tennessee at home. They get Alabama at home. They get Texas at a neutral site that they have shown that they can win there, even when Texas is one of the best teams in the country. So Oklahoma at 7.5 feels just slightly low. If it had said 8.5, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty difficult to argue with, because you go 4-0 in non-conference conceivably. You got to get 4 more SEC wins. Auburn, South Carolina, Texas. I don't think Ole Miss or Tennessee is all that hard to grab a victory. I think Ole Miss is going. We'll chat about Ole Miss in a second, but that's my immediate takeaway is Oklahoma, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt feel too high in those rankings. That if you're going to say, hey, 7.5, 6.5, 2.5. On the flip side, or those are too low. I beg your pardon, too low. Too high on the flip side might be Auburn, and I think they get 7.5 because, again, non-conference is not good. They're going to go 4-0 in the non-conference. Alabama, A&M, Cal, New Mexico, and ULM. There's 4 right there. Are they going to be better than Arkansas? I would say so. There's 5. Are they going to be better than Kentucky? Are they going to be better than Vanderbilt? There's 6. But then your options for wins are Oklahoma, Georgia, Missouri, Kentucky, Texas A&M, Alabama. Does that instill a ton of confidence in you that they're going to win 2 of those 5 or 6 games? No. Okay, probably a little high then. 7.5, when you're when you're in a spot where, like, for the second consecutive year, you're like, I don't really know who's going to be our quarterback, is a weird spot to be in for Auburn. Mississippi State, 4.5. Feels a little high to me, strictly because I don't have a ton of confidence in their non-conference. Eastern Kentucky at Arizona State, Toledo, and UMass. Okay. Are they guaranteed to beat Arizona State at Arizona State? I don't think so. I don't know that they're guaranteed to beat Toledo. So they've got UMass and Eastern Kentucky, an FCS school, and then one of the worst Division I, one of the worst FBS programs. I'll give you 2 there. They play at Texas, at Georgia, Texas A&M, at Tennessee, Missouri, and at Ole Miss. So you're looking at, they need to beat Arkansas and Florida to get to 4. They need to beat both of them, in my opinion, to get to 4. And that's the under. I think that's a hell of a tough spot to be in. Are they going to be better than Florida? I don't think so. I think Florida is going to be pretty good. And the problem with Florida being pretty good is it's not going to be damn anywhere close to good enough. They're in a tough spot. A&M at 8.5 feels high. And that's with a weak non-conference. They play McNeese State, Bowling Green, New Mexico State. But then also A&M is playing Notre Dame and Arkansas. Or they're playing Notre Dame and LSU and Texas. It's not as easy as it looks. So for A&M to get to 8.5, let's say they go 3-1 in the non-conference, they lose to Notre Dame, which I don't think is an outrageous take. Can they beat Florida? Yeah. There's 4. Arkansas, yeah, 5. Mississippi State, 6. South Carolina, 7. Is A&M Auburn a toss-up? Pretty close to it. Is A&M LSU a toss-up? I wouldn't say so. I would say it's decidedly in favor of LSU. Missouri, Texas. I don't see how A&M gets to 9 wins. I think that's a high number. I believe Mike Elko is going to turn them around. I don't know that it's going to be immediate, but I think they're going to be pretty decent under him because they're going to have some interest in playing defense. But 9 wins in year 1 feels really high in a schedule that includes Notre Dame, Missouri, LSU, and Texas. That feels like 4 losses right there in a 12-game schedule. So I don't know that I think A&M is going to be able to eclipse 8.5. Feels high to me. And then the rest of the conference, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, LSU, Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Arkansas, Florida, and South Carolina, feels like, yeah, those are the right numbers. Those are the right numbers to me. If you were to ask, like when I was going through clicking on them, I would say to myself, okay, what is Georgia's over-under in my mind? 10.5. It's 10.5. What's the over-under in my mind to Texas? 10.5. Alabama, I said 9.5. I thought LSU would be 10.5. It wasn't. It was 9.5. Missouri, 9.5. Yeah, those feel like right numbers. When you look at the other side of the coin, where the Arkansas, the Florida, and the South Carolina, even that feels like, yeah, I think those are the right numbers. I think Florida's going to be pretty good, and they're in a hell of a spot because their schedule is difficult. Their final 5 games of the season is as bad of a 5-game stretch as you can get in 2024. They are home, or I guess not home. They are facing Georgia in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. At Texas, home for LSU, home for Ole Miss, at Florida State. If you were to ask me to put together who's going to make the college football playoff in 2024, there are 5 schools, those last 5 games, I would tell you probably 4 of them are in the college football playoff. And that's Florida's final 5 games. Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State. Maybe all 5 of them are in the college football playoff. And that's Georgia's November. Or that's Florida's November, I beg your pardon. And that's after they've already played Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and Miami. I think Florida's going to be okay. Their record's just not going to show it. And I don't know that Billy Napier makes it out of 2024 with his job. I don't see how that happens, because in that final 5 games of the season, not only is Florida not going to be favored to win any of them, I don't know that Georgia's going to be favored to keep any of them within 10 points. That's a hell of a spot to be in, especially when 2 of them are at home and 4 of them are within your state. Like in those 5 games, they leave the state of Florida once, but you're going to Texas, rough. You're going to Florida State, it's tough. So I'm bullish on Billy Napier at Florida. It's just not going to be in 2024, and I don't know if they can get through 2024. But 5.5 feels like the right number, especially when you get to the back half of that 5 and 5. It's like, or the back half of that schedule, those 5 games. Florida's non-conference is tough. Miami, Florida State, UCF, and Samford. Now, okay, it's not tough, but it's more difficult than damn near anybody else in the SEC. You get probably a gimme against Samford, a gimme at Mississippi State, probably a win over UCF. I think Florida might be staring like 3-9 potentially in the face if things don't go well. But can they beat Kentucky or Tennessee or A&M? I think so. But that last 5-game stretch is as bad as it can be in 2024. Nobody in their right mind is signing up for, hey, the final 5 weeks of the season, we'd like to play 4 college football playoff teams. Like, nobody in their right mind signs up for that. And yet that is what Florida is facing in 2024. Again, Georgia at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss at Florida State. Yikes. And we'll probably talk about this later at some point here in the next couple of weeks or months or whatever, of like, hey, who's most likely to be on the hot seat or fired mid-season or the college football season? I think Billy Napier is pretty high on that list, and it has nothing to do with other than like the schedule does not help you in the slightest. Because if you don't start with a win over Miami, you're already off to a rough start. You get an FCS school in week 2, Texas A&M at Mississippi State. You get a bye week in September 28th. If you are anything other than probably 2-2 at that point of the season, he's probably fired. Then you get a 3-week stretch of UCF, Tennessee, Kentucky before another bye week. If you are anything other than 4-3 at that point, if you are anything less than 4-3 at that point, he's probably fired, going into a 5-week stretch of Georgia at Texas, LSU, Ole Miss at Florida State. Yikes. Not a fun spot to be in. So that's, I think Florida 5.5 feels like the right number. If anything, it's borderline high. And that's scary if you're a Gators fan, because you're looking to be like, when you look at the columns of which side of the column you should be on in the SEC hierarchy, right? Should Florida be behind Arkansas, Kentucky, Auburn, Tennessee, Missouri? In Florida's mind, in Florida boosters and Florida fans, athletic department, president, university, board of trustees, chancellor, whatever, in their minds, is Florida supposed to be in the same column with South Carolina, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Kentucky? No. In Florida's mind, they should be in the same group with Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Texas, etc. So it's a bad spot to find yourself in, but that's where they find themselves. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch it all play out here in 2024. But that's a look at my SEC over-unders, my immediate reactions. Who's high, who's low? That's what I think. Want to know what you think? Hit us up in the comments below. Let us know where we're right, where we're wrong. We'll figure it out from there. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching here on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting great college football content that we're pumping out here on Saturday Glory. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. It goes a long way in helping out the channel. Back at it tomorrow here on the Daily Huddle with Saturday Glory.